first question for you. You have an amazing amount of experience. We can go in so many different directions, but because you are in this amazing global space, how are you building community globally? What resources do you and your company go into to actually foster community and start building around Web in that ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. But a huge focus is really just being there in person and putting in the time and effort every single month to make sure that we are hosting these amazing proof of community events all around the world. And what those are gatherings, say like we've had a bunch of different ones with our team in India, or you're ramping them up here in New York City where I'm based, and really tailoring the content to what is most useful for folks in that region, whether it's, hey, spinning up your own node, here's a how-to, versus, hey, do you want to work in Web3? Here's what things to consider if you want to get hired. And it's never a Shardeum pitch as much as there's a lot of great stuff to share there. So I think the number one thing is just like making a concerted effort to be there and interact with the community face to face. And that's what kind of can translate to scaling a community online.
Does that take different teams of people to actually start building out and manage these communities? Being that seems like community managers is now such a niche role, but so important to a lot of the community fostering.
Yeah, it's so important. And I feel like it's one of those areas of Web3 organizations where it's often understaffed. So you'll have the occasional, like very frazzled, overworked community manager. But that's really a spot where I think you should focus on bringing in talent and hiring. And we have a great, very large team that is focused on community and other aspects of growth. But really, it's the folks that are going to be there every day understanding the individual communities. And frankly, if you don't have folks based in the area or helping local sort of community managers spin up their own sort of approach to the proof of community or whatever meetup format the project has, you're going to be missing out on a lot. It's not one blanket tactic. It needs to be from different perspectives and different people all working towards something when it comes to your community building.
How do you incentivize people to engage and continue that engagement? What are you offering them because there's this social reciprocity. When people contribute, they expect value. It's just like almost human nature in that way. What are you offering for these individuals to actually allow them to continue engaging within your community?
Yeah. So it varies a lot. Like on this kind of slightly more lofty, idealistic view, you want to be like, everything is intrinsically motivated. So you want to be part of this like movement towards what we see of this like greater push towards decentralization. Good. But when it comes down to it, it can also be we're supplying valuable knowledge when it comes to, like I mentioned earlier, spinning up a node, engaging in Web3, and people see value in that. People see value in it's been even sushi or a glass of wine and some interactions one-on-one, getting out of your apartment, getting out of your house. But I think that another big kind of motivating is tying all of these community engagements into larger scale campaigns that are occasionally incentivized. I've seen some different work, especially before NFTs were super popular. And then we've seen a little bit of a downhill trend that I won't get into. Those special badges so folks can feel like they're actually a part of something that not everyone is engaged with. So I think that it's a combination of all of those different approaches that can really be valuable. But especially when you're working in building out a community in a new market, it is actually trying to get out there and listening first about what folks want to learn and what actually drives them, whether it is a certain aspect of a product that you're building, or if it is the desire to meet with other folks in Web3 because they're missing that sense of camaraderie, or whether it is initially, and you want to convert them down the line, the desire for a free glass of wine or a piece of pizza. And that's something you can still build on. Like you got to start somewhere, especially in new markets that can be tougher to break into.
Yeah. How do you market Web3 product like Shardeum when it's not one singular product?
Yeah. So we are pushing, when I talk about Shardeum, the whole ecosystem. Since we're in L1, we really want to focus on what we're doing as well as the core value props for each region, whether that's the focus on decentralization, whether that's like an easier onboarding process, whether that is running your own node, but also really focusing on what ecosystem projects are working with us and what they can provide. Say certain markets maybe are looking for a new wallet solution, or they're looking for a new way to engage with Web3 gaming, or whatever the
Mm,
case may be. I think that you really focus on your overarching message, which for us, solving the trilemma and decentralization for everyone, and then really
mm,
focus on each core market and what the communities need, what they're looking for, what they need to learn to keep engaging with you and hone in on that. And
yeah.
it's really important there to bring in those like ecosystem projects, those key partners, because that's really how you build, I think, the most strength with the community is that sort of collaborative joint effort. You're not just out there talking about yourself all the time. It's just like when you meet a new person and you're trying to have a chat with them, if they're just screaming in your face, I'm Kelsey, I do this. And that's the entire conversation. It doesn't really resonate the same way as someone asking questions about you and trying to shape the conversation in that direction.
Yeah. And when what is the driver for these communities? You talk about the different drivers, or taking a step back, what are the ecosystems? Describe ecosystems. Are these projects, foundations, small developer groups, one person? When you describe ecosystem for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So the perspectives that I have on our overall ecosystem is more or less all of the above. So we have the groups of builders and developers. A lot
Mm,
of times they're associated, but not always, but different projects that say are building on Shardeum as their L1 of choice or a L1 of choice for them. So it really encompasses all of that. I think that there's also a even more extended view or broader view of ecosystem that includes the network of investors and maybe their portfolio companies and projects as well. So there's a lot of different aspects of that to focus on. And when we're thinking about specifically those in-person community engagements that I mentioned, for the US, I found that bringing in like that right mix of different ecosystem partners, for example, like our first one was with Koala Wallet, which is a smaller, newer wallet. And then we've also worked with one of our investors called Strop Crypto. And it's bringing that mix. And then you have a community that's, oh, I can come and learn about a new wallet. I can come and learn about what's happening, what's being built on Shardium, but I can also get a perspective sometimes from an investor about what they're looking for. So it provides a more holistic perspective on Web3 that isn't just focused on
yeah.
pitching us and what we're doing. It's aimed towards really providing more value and actually serving the local community and getting us out of our apartments.
When thinking about Shardium and when people select L1s to work with, what are the intangibles that they're not considering or aren't typically considered when selecting L1? I'm sure there's scalability, speed, and cost. Those are one thing, but as with many different products that are similar, it's more than that. That I guess contributes to you committing to working with that company, technology, product. What are the intangibles that make Shardium some, something really special to work with, I guess?
Absolutely. I think it's a few different factors, at least for us. 'Cause we do have that very, very large community on Discord, like the 500,000 plus people. But really, when it comes down to it, is the sort of energy and excitement behind a project like this is a huge draw. And that's what it also influenced my decision to join the team is, okay, here's a pre-made net L1, and there's this much excitement and, that can be, you can look at all the numbers, but it's hard to measure when you go into an event or you have a conversation, then there's that level of engagement and passion that isn't just localized to the United States. I see a lot of projects that are just focused on specific regions. I really like that we had and have a broader approach and a really significant community in India, which is a very exciting market for folks. And again, like the level of kind of excitement and commitment to the project in all of these different regions, and we're still just starting out and growing in the United States, has been very, very exciting. And I think another kind of key aspect there is something that I think is really important is the commitment to really supporting the ecosystem. As an L1, I see our role as bringing in those projects for collaborations when there's an opportunity, trying to co-host some of these community engagements, when we're able to lending a hand when it comes to even like advisory work. Because a lot of times you're bootstrapping your own project, you decide to build on, say, Shardium. It's really exciting. You're like, I actually have no idea how to build my own community or market anything or pitch to an investor. And I think as we grow, I want to continue to focus in and bring in those ecosystem partners more and more and help really provide a little bit more of that sort of collaboration as well. Because I think L1s, they can be strong technically and they can be really strong on a brand perspective, but really it comes down to like how invested are you in your ecosystems? And that's
Yeah.
such a key part.
Yeah. How does an L1 measure success?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This has been a big conversation, I think, through my entire Web3 career and before that too. But it is always like, how do we know that it's quote unquote working? And when I think about that, I'm not necessarily focused on the technical side because that's fairly a little less complicated to tell if it's working or not, if it's broken or if it's up and running and functional. There's, of course, a lot more nuance to it, but you can tell. With the specific KPIs when it comes to our side of the work too, I really am focused on okay, are we sustaining community growth based on not only the typical social metrics, Discord, all of that, but are we seeing a level of engagement from folks? Are we seeing the same people coming again and again and talking and being engaged in conversations on those different channels? Because then you're seeing the beginnings of potential for your project. And that's really, I think, a super strong
Yeah.
indicator of if things are going well or not. And then as well as that, are you seeing the same folks come again and again to the meetups? Are you seeing them getting increasingly engaged in the conversations and more focus on the tech in the conversations and slightly less focus on the pizza, for example? And so it's all of those sort of harder to pin down indicators that I think can be just as important as, oh, we got X number of press mentions this month. We had X percentage growth in Discord, but you really want to see those individuals maintaining their level of passion and staying with you throughout the journey.
I was listening to one of interviews, and this concept you brought up was interesting, and I'm curious. Talk about the trilemma being security, scalability, decentralization is what companies like you focus on or are comprised of. Where do companies you feel within your space or similar, where do they compromise the most when thinking about those three concepts?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I feel like we see a lot of that in this trilemma conversation has been ongoing for a while now. I would say I see the most compromise when it comes to decentralization because I see different projects that can solve scalability through lack of decentralization and are willing to sacrifice on that. And that's not something we're very comfortable with. We really want to just come in and make sure that we're maintaining all three and truly solving the trilemma. And I see decentralization as something other projects can often sacrifice on when it comes to the human element as well. Because I think there's decentralization from a sort of broader tech perspective, super important, super key to
Yeah.
what we do. But then there's also decentralization from a human perspective. Are you working with everyone and they're based in the exact same city as you and from the same socioeconomic background? Then is that real decentralization from a human
Mm.
perspective? I would argue no. And I think that that aspect is often overlooked. And it's something that we're also really seeking to broaden the perspective on decentralization when it comes to the human side as well.
Yeah. How do you solve the problem of, maybe not a problem, but I guess the new use case that a lot of users or people who are engaged are typically engaged with either multiple products, multiple pieces of entertainment, ads. We are bombarded with so much. How do you make sure that one, you're getting attention, but also driving that attention to some action?
Absolutely. I think that it really depends on for different projects and for us as we're looking at new markets as well, what phase you are in that specific market. So, for example, I think it's really a testament to our team, part of our team that's based in India, that Shardeum is, I would say, quite well known in India, and that's amazing. And so, what you do to tailor that and continue the community engagement is really focus in on the types of experiences, the information, and the content that you're providing. So instead of a broader Web3 thought leadership almost exclusively when it comes to that, which is a lot of what I'm focused on here in our newer market in the United States, it's the next step down. Okay,
Yeah.
what can you do with Shardium? And then down the line, how do you do that?
Yeah.
It really shifts the whole perspective on how you educate and bring people along that journey with you. But if you in at the wrong time with that type of content, it's going to fall on deaf ears because people don't really understand or there's not that level of brand affinity to really bring people in and actually want to even take that next step if you haven't laid the proper foundation.
It's so fascinating thinking about the space because there's just so much. It's so much greenfield, and you're defining as you go. When you're describing what technologies people are building on your platform, what do you see most commonly built, or whether it's an application or something else? What do you see most commonly built?
Yeah, we're seeing, I would say, quite an exciting variety. We have some that we're also announcing in the not too distant future that I wish we could get into a little bit more. I would say that one thing that I would like to pivot slightly to see even more of are games.
Yeah,
I think that Web3 gaming is such a compelling, broader on ramp that really does address a lot of the challenges that we've seen with adoptions. I'm always I don't want to pigeonhole us in any way, because of course there's a wide range of different types of projects that are building on Shardeum that we're really excited to be working with. But I'm extra excited about gaming just for the industry as a whole. I don't know if you have dug into it as much, but do you have a strong perspective on Web3 gaming, and where do you think that could take the industry overall? Or have you just been like seeing what happens?
I've been seeing what happens, just receiving information. So I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that one thing that we missed out on a lot in Web3, when you're talking about, okay, adoption and how do you keep communities with you, and when we're thinking about growing the industry overall, I really do think that we've overlooked fun. We've gotten very serious very quickly as a way. I think we felt like we had to prove ourselves in a certain way.
Yeah.
And maybe NFTs introduced a level of fun, but there wasn't the same type of engagement and relationship that you could have with, from what I've seen, NFTs just as strict, like an NFT versus a gaming experience, which can, of course, involve like NFTs as part of
Yeah.
that whole journey. I think it's really exciting. I've seen a lot of excitement and traction there overall. And I think it's really great because it shows it's indicative of a greater focus now, I think, moving
Mm.
forward on the user experience and how people want to engage with this new technology versus like scary having to write down a bunch of words for your seed phrase and then lock it in vault. And I know that's like so it's a little bit of a dramatic perspective, but I really want us to get to a place where folks are using the technology without really knowing that they
Yeah.
are, just like we use a lot of things without necessarily thinking about what's behind it. And that's when I feel like we need to get there a little bit more in terms of
Yeah.
adoption.
Yeah. There's so many things you just said that I want to expand upon. But one is when you think about the potential there, put numbers on it just for us to have perspective in terms of what's the potential to actually have online gamers or even the average individual involved in some sort of Web3 game that actually will have long-term benefits or get them involved in an ecosystem that's subsequently, say, on a layer one like Shardeum.
Yeah, I would have to look at the overall number of basically the total number of folks that are currently using any form of game, whether it be a console video game, but especially like computer, PC based games, because I feel like that is the market share and more. Because really, anyone who wants to have a nice time and is interested in playing on their computer, I would love to see down the line a cool console game, is someone that could then engage with this type of game as well.
Yeah.
If and when some are very close, and there's been a lot of progress, but just getting that user experience. Something I've chatted about a little in the past is, I'm sure you've seen too, there is a huge focus on play to earn. So you're
Mhm.
playing basically to get some sort of monetary compensation, which makes sense. That's a huge motivating factor.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend like it's not for pretty much everyone, unless I guess you're obscenely wealthy, but I can't really speak from that perspective. I think there's been a positive shift to play and earn, so that there's more of a engagement with the actual experience. You're not doing it just to get something, just like you hope that folks interact with your community, not
Mm.
just to get something like financial compensation, but they're interacting because there's something that is really calling them in a deeper way, whether it's with a game because it's a fun experience, whether it's L1 because they're learning something, they feel like they've found their community and their people. And so we
Yeah.
want to keep seeing things shifting in that overall direction. And really personally, I just love to see some really fun games to play. I miss some of my old computer games. Did you ever play any when you were growing up,
Oh
or
yeah.
were you not
Yeah.
one? the game.
I wasn't much of a gamer, but there were like a handful of games I would just get hooked on. And so anytime I would just spend impulsively like 4 hours doing one thing and then maybe not touch it for a few months and then right back onto it. But I just remember, I mean, it just offers so much freedom, imagination. You can collaborate with other people. Obviously, it gets a bad rap, but I think we're beyond that. We know how to manage it and we know the benefits. And now we see how largely impactful the community of gaming is. It's a whole $1 trillion industry worldwide. And it's exciting to see the mechanisms of Web3 getting adopted to see what that has to unfold. What are we pushing towards? And as we, as in Web3 companies overall, what is the eventual future that drives companies like yours?
I think that we can look at this overall vision of centralization for everyone. And what does that mean? Everything depends where you're based, like broader access to financial system, should you wish to engage, like easier identity solutions, more fun with games. But ultimately, what I see happening is Web3, like blockchain technology, whatever we want to call it. I know we flip around on the terms over the years, is that it's going to be something that's operating in the background that you don't necessarily know you're using, but is improving things in one of those almost intangible ways. Just like when we went from the earliest days, like computers, I remember like a giant Mac that we had that was black and white. And it was amazing. And that operating system, I didn't know really how it worked. But it provided this really interesting thing to us in a broader range of connectivity to other humans. And I think as we continue to improve, Web 2 and evolve into Web 3, it's going to be similar. One of those advancements that's, oh, wait, what is this at first? But then it's something that you're so used to and you're using it all the time. And it's just operating in the background, making things a little bit more efficient, even if it's just a tiny bit better. But I think that we can do multitudes better than that. But it's going to be just something that folks are not as focused on because it'll turn into something that's just part of your day-to-day life.
Yeah. If you were to give us a range, how far are we from having it involved in technology that we may not be even aware of, whether it's on cellular or identity or our wallet? How far are we from that?
I would like to think within the next 5 years, not for the full, it's in so many different things, we don't even know it perspective, but I would think that, say, for sending remittances, folks that are working in other countries and want to send money home, I feel like that could be made into a seamless experience where you don't know it's necessarily Web3 very soon. Same with gaming. I think that folks can be playing Web3 games within the next 5 years, and they're not necessarily Web3 games. And you are getting badges that you don't necessarily focus on as NFTs, because I think NFTs do not have a great rap after the crazy market happenings of the recent past. But so I think that especially with those different uses, sooner rather than later, as far as full, wow, this is a part of all of these different aspects of technology, maybe a little bit longer, but could be within the next 5 years if we hone in on our user experience focus a little bit more. But what do
Yeah.
you think? Do you feel like that could be realistic, or do you think it's going to be a much longer view on it?
It's a great question. I ask it without an answer. I would say I would say that it really depends on what industry is willing and motivated to adopt it for a specific valid reason. I think we just see that with any technology over history is it might be available. It might already have some use case where it's used. However, it's not until a catalyst creates a need for it. I could see it happening in encryption of identity, privacy. If there's a few more social scares where your people's identities are getting misplaced, I could see that moving forward. You can see other people adopting it for larger data sets. And there's just so many. I talked to a friend recently who's involved in climate credit market. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but there's just so much. It's like the wild, wild west because these climate credits, it's hard to understand their validity and track their uses, whether or not it's expired or used or what have you. Web3 getting involved in that obviously has benefits on a sustainability standpoint, but also who's motivated by that. It really depends. I think 5 years, I feel like maybe sooner. I feel like there might be a bigger push. So like 3, we'll see. It really depends. I was talking to another friend and I'm curious in your take, who worked for Prime Labs, and he worked for Near Foundation. And they were challenging a lot of the speed and scalability to take a host of transactions. They were doing more of a financial tools, but they saw that the speed at which they could transact was just, they were hitting the maximum and really not able to increase that scalability yet. There's technology that can be made, but it costs a lot of money. Where do you feel that scalability is in terms of companies actually being able to handle large volumes of transaction that, say, Visa has, for instance?
Yeah, I think that will be something that a lot of projects are continuing to focus in on. For us, that was something that we really wanted to consider, in that we decided to create another L1 so we could build it from the ground up with scalability and the other parts of the trilemma, but that in mind. It's just a different approach. Like some projects, they've built something that perhaps can't handle that volume, and then they're then relying on layer twos.
Yeah.
And there's all of these different approaches. And my overall perspective now is, I think building it from the ground up is inherently very strong, and the approach, of course, that I'm aligned with. But right now, there's a lot of space, I think, to take different perspectives on this, and ideally down the line, figure out ways to come together and collaborate and take the best of both. And maybe it is specific L2s, even partnering with L1s and
Yeah.
maintaining that level of scalability and making sure that we can scale that level number of transactions without bumping up fees like we've seen in the past with some of the other L1s, which again, then impacts, for me, in my perspective, the human element of decentralization. So it's too expensive for a lot of folks to use. You're going to miss out on that part. And
Inaccessible.
we're not really building a very different system at that point.
Yeah. I have an answer for this personally, but I'm curious to hear yours first. What industry do you think will be the last to adopt Web3 or have heavier decentralized involvement in structure?
That's an interesting one. I would have to think about that. When I think of some of the slower, more bureaucratic elements, I don't know that it would be necessarily an industry, but I think that certain parts of the government might be a little bit slower to completely adopt Web3, and not because it isn't the best possible solution for some of the challenges that we face on that level, just because it can take a while to navigate implementing new solutions. And part of that is due to the fact that it can just budgets and taking a long time to wrap your head around things, concerns around a new technology and sort of the desire to protect the population. But
Hmm.
also, it just can take forever to update systems that you already have. I know certain
Mm.
government agencies are still using very old ones due to security concerns and making sure that there's no data leaked and all of that kind of stuff. So I could see that taking a little bit longer. And again, not because it
Yeah.
isn't a great solution and wouldn't be a real positive thing, both for the agencies as well as the people that they are serving, but just because sometimes it just takes a lot longer within those sort of structures.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you answered it. From what you answered, it sounded like a time elapsed in terms of time adoption. I was thinking about it in the sense of like mass adoption, seeing when it's more commonplace. I personally
Mhm.
think it's social. I think social platforms have so much power, and it's really hard to relinquish that, especially when it's commonplace to be on, have an Instagram or have a Facebook, have a LinkedIn, have these professional, personal, and relationship, I guess, arenas. I don't know what you would call them, ecosystems. But I think social would be the hardest because it depends on relinquishing data and privacy. And as we know, that's been a battle for so long. Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because in your mind, what incentive would social platforms as they exist now have to start working with or implementing Web3 based solutions that are handing all of the data?
Zero.
Exactly. Zero.
They'll probably
So
integrate
I
with
agree with you.
wallets and stuff, but I don't think, yeah, I highly doubt it'll be like, yeah, because that's their biggest monetary component. That's their business model, is taking information and having ad spend on it or having companies pay for it. It's interesting to hear though about holding almost like your data as a profile in Web3 ecosystems, being able to opt in and then actually opt out without having any residual information, cookies, cache, personal information left behind. How do you think that changes how companies, I guess, collaborate? Because I see there being so much potential now that they have to collaborate almost and share customers. Do you feel like it'll be more collaborative, or do you think it'll move to a way that is highly focused, singular places?
Yeah, I would like to think it'd be a little more collaborative. In practice, it's really hard to say. I think that if that's something that there is a clear benefit to that relates to the bottom line with some of the organizations, I could see it moving to a more collaborative way, but you also have to really facilitate that. And so that can be, I think that there's a great payoff to focusing in on that, but it can take a little bit of effort up front. Because when you think about it, like, just on even on an individual level, if you're stretched really thin or a team is stretched really thin and you're trying to think about how to collaborate with another group to do it well requires some time and energy and brain power. And that would make things easier in the long run. But sometimes there's just none of that initial energy and effort being put into it when it needs to happen to reap those longer term benefits. What do you think the evolution would be there?
Yeah, yeah, I don't have an answer for you. I don't. Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
Yeah, I just really like to see a little more collaboration across the board, but having worked at so many different projects and organizations at this point, it really depends on those team. We're all just a bunch of people like looking at this, whether you're part of a company,
yeah,
whether you're an individual or a freelancer, and it's kind of energy and level of prioritization. And sometimes folks are just stretched too thin, maybe especially if they're working in the realm
yeah,
of emergent tech where you're bootstrapping and you have maybe 10 jobs in one, which is amazing and really rewarding in some
yeah.
regards. But you can see some of that collaborative element suffering at times.
I think it really depends on how good the business is going to be on figuring out how to monetize outside of just direct sales. You see a lot of companies that do a really good job of just keeping this Glossier first, for instance. Everybody waits for the next Glossier pop-up event, and they always have some unique item, or you almost are part of that community, right? They're, I would say, community, and they've done it for years. And anyone who might have something, you're like, oh, where did you get that? There's always an exchange in that. And I think they've done such a good job. But other companies, I think, have very much more focused on how can I transact now, and how can I more so do a long-term sale and cater to the short-term needs. We'll see. I think companies that do it well will continue to do it well. Other companies, you'll see just random. I don't know. I'm into fashion, and I was not a great fan of the Fendasi collaboration. It was very odd, and but the people are trying new things, so we'll see. It's all the experiment of it. But I'm curious to hear from you. When did a career in technology seem like the only thing? Maybe not the only thing, but the right decision. There's so many different industries. There's so many different worlds people live in. When was it like, oh, technology is something I want to build a career in?
Yeah, I worked in fashion industry and with beauty brands. I love the Glossier example you gave. I was like, um, so I was working for a very small luxury beauty brand like a long time ago now. Maybe this was like 2016, 2017. And I'd always been interested in getting more into the tech side of things just because it seemed super exciting. Do I appreciate a good nail polish? Am I intrigued by the latest Glossier drop? Yes, absolutely. But I was trying to figure out, do I want to spend most of every day focusing on similar things? And I was like, I don't know. I don't think so. It's not energizing me every day. The problems that we were solving were fascinating, uh, but ultimately not for me as much. And it's something that I knew I could continue to engage with should I pursue another career. And I had chatted with some folks over the years, and I'd heard a little bit about blockchain technology. And for me, it wasn't just pursuing a career in tech, although I was broadly interested and had done some consulting
Yeah,
for different projects, but especially emergent tech. So I was like, if I'm going to make this leap, let's go somewhere a
somewhere
little
cool.
strange and cool. That's going to be different and exciting and uncertain. I think I had a relatively high tolerance for that type of risk and had the privilege to know that if everything crashed and burned, I could move home. I wouldn't have been able to afford to stay here, but I think that I was in a place where all of those factors came together and I felt like I could take that risk in 2018. I think I started the interview maybe 2017. And I had heard I was actually at some fashion party event in Soho here in New York City and ran into someone because we had on the same like jean jacket with the fleecy stuff on the inside. So it was cold out. And we started talking and she worked for a Web3 company. It was Consensus.
Wow.
So we hit it off and had some more conversations. And I'd already been doing some research and poking around. So my banking friends were nervous about blockchain. I was like, this is intriguing. And I ended up giving myself a little crash course and going through all the different interviews and
Yeah.
just took the plunge. And it was just as exciting and strange and interesting as I had hoped it would be, and maybe even more.
Yeah. And what in particular led you into marketing and growth strategy, attracting people towards the ecosystem versus so many different ways you could work within the company? Was it something you're naturally already good at, the skills you came with, or something that you grew into?
Yeah, so my background was in like marketing, communications, brand strategy, some of the creative side of things, but I also just fell into that as well. I think it's because I really enjoy the human side of things. And for me, based on the types of jobs that were available that also focused on the human side of things, marketing and community strategy and that side of it was what was available and what worked out.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, okay, I'm planning on doing growth in emergent tech or just across the board focusing on that. But that really seemed like a great intersection for my skills and what I really enjoyed doing, which was bringing people together, trying to understand them, understanding how they see themselves, and then focusing on how to actually reach them where they are, whether it's through like education, whether it's through a creative brand strategy, a press release, whatever that shape that takes. But that being said, it's like always something that I feel like I always want to take the coding classes and the different boot camps, and it's always on my list, but it's one of those things where it's harder to make it a priority after a full day doing the other job. So I've definitely toyed with that a lot, and just for my own education, upskilling on that side of thing would be really exciting. Whether or not I would focus more on that moving forward, it's fairly
Yeah.
unlikely. But yeah, I just like the human element of things.
Yeah.
And it's a part that I think sometimes in tech we overlook.
What's the last thing that maybe sparked an idea, whether it was an audiobook, a book, something someone said? What's the last thing that sparked an idea for you, and what did it spark?
I guess a recent one was I was at the annual meetings for one of our supporters, Struck Crypto. They're awesome. And I was at a series of panels and conversations, and it was before Thanksgiving. So I started thinking about all of us leaving, and based on some of the conversations we were having there, like how you start having conversations with folks that aren't in the industry. Because I think sometimes we stick in our own little bubbles. So from that, sort of sparked the idea for an op-ed that I wrote that was focused on conversations you have when you go home for Thanksgiving, when you're like sitting at the table
Yeah.
with your family. And so that was a lot of fun. And I think for me, that really hit home with all of the content that I consume outside of Web3 and tech and how it's presented, like even old fashioned magazines, different, even like fashion blogs as well. And just really how we're talking about those things and making the information and content visual and digestible. It's a different topic, but I think that sometimes in emergent tech and Web3, we overlook that. People just also want to be
So right.
entertained,
Yeah.
like miss it a lot. So I'm just really that in all of those different things
Yeah.
inspired me so much. Like, what is actually more entertaining? What would I want to look at and read that doesn't feel like, even though I am very fascinated by it, but another work thing? What would I pick up off the clock in a way?
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, and even more so building a company because you want to identify what am I even interested in? What are people around me? Why? How long do they use these products? Why are they using them for so long? Because it also elicits a certain type of feeling and experience. And so when I feel like realize that as whether a founder or someone building in a certain space or attracting attention for a product, you got to understand that, yeah, people just want to have fun, see something that's funny, or be tapped into something emotional that was something that's powerful. And you got to play within those natural relationships that humans have with things and entertainment. I agree. There's a lot I talk to founders all the time. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Because there's just so much companies that are not necessarily having a holistic, maybe brand, identity. Things just don't feel good. I don't know how else to describe it. They just don't feel cohesive or fun to work with. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
No, we're definitely on the same page there because you see a lot of the same out there. And of course, there's a reason those decisions have been made, but just really think about your audiences and like what they would actually want to pick up and look
Yeah.
at if it's, say, another rainy weekend in New York that
Yeah.
we're going
Yeah.
through for I don't know how many weekends straight and be entertained and enjoy. And to what you were saying too, it builds that sort of brand affinity, like
Mm,
people that want to be a part of that community because maybe that community is fun and creative and a little bit different and engaging in that way. And then you have your own kind of culture and rhetoric to a degree around what you're doing. And it just brings everyone together in a really unique way.
yeah. If I was a developer or someone with an idea and want to get involved in Web3, what would you recommend? Where do I start?
Yeah, I would say aside from reaching out to our team, which I think is a great group of resources at Shardeum.org, I really think that it's if you're able to get to any of those in-person meetups or events that I mentioned. And the reason is I found them to be quite, they have their pitfalls, but they're quite collaborative. They'll give you a really great sense of what's happening in the ecosystem. And there are a lot of collaborative folks that are willing to bring you under their wing, whether it's, say, with like our project or others. I do think that there's great online boot camps, but I think that for that initial sort of community building and spark, if you're able to get to something in person, anything from a proof of community meetup to a larger conference, sometimes the smaller ones feel a little easier to navigate and people will notice and take an interest a little bit more. That can be a really great way to do it. And you'll be building out your network at the same time because under the assumption, making the assumption that you may want to say work in Web3 down the line as a builder, as a developer, as a marketer, whatever, meeting people as early as you can will really help you secure one of those positions down the line. Also, if that's your goal.
Yeah. Podcaster to podcaster, what's a question that you always love to ask and that we can implement into this show?
Yeah, there's so many different interesting ones. Luckily, we covered a lot of sort of the human element, like brand type questions that I love to talk about. I always think it's interesting to hear more about a project or not even in Web3 that you think is doing community right. And by whatever
Mm,
definition you have in mind, whether it's, oh, it's because it's big or whether because it's the smallest, most engaged group you've ever seen. Does any sort of organization come to mind for you when it comes to that sort of perspective?
that's a great question because I'm building a community right now, Grupo, where we connect remote workers. And so I obsess about people who are doing it right. I think it's hard because it's wherever, and now it's about the platform and who you are as a person. So whether you're on Slack and those communities, I think Gen Z VCs does a really good job actually of people who are attracting or wanting to get into VC and become a scout and things like that. They have a really strong Slack community, do a really good job, high engagement. I think companies wise, there's so many Web3 companies I can think of, but they're all doing a pretty good job. They have such high level of engagement. They have products. Midjourney is obviously doing a great job, but they have such a really good way of keeping things trending, prompting. I don't know if you see that, but there's so many trends of Midjourney AI photos, and then it's everyone getting involved in that.
The more
Individuals,
the cheeseburger with pickles and pickles and more pickles and more.
I'm like, come on. I'm like, but
Yeah, so many.
but I'm gonna do it myself, of course. I think individuals, there's so many great creators now in the tech space. It's interesting always to listen to Balaji and his ideas. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so many people doing it right. And they're the people you see often when you're scrolling, they're those people who you're seeing, whether they're a smaller name or they've hit you in the perfect niche and you're always seeing them on your feed. Those two, I feel maybe we're not one, but I aim to be the latter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I think that it's a really good perspective on what you're like hoping to build and grow too, which is really exciting. How long have you been focused on like Grupo and what sort of was the catalyst for that?
Yeah. We launched Grupo in June. And the catalyst was we built a huge community of 5,000 developers in South America. And we just kept hearing that they were feeling isolated, feeling alone, they having challenges, just developing other skills outside of the technical skills because they're talented, but maybe on the communication level, they feel less confident or
Mhm.
applying for jobs or whatever. So there was just so much there. And so my co-founder started doing community events and we started doing discussions. And that just led to the fact that we wanted to invest all of our time into a community and offering resources, then ideally creating an ecosystem where people self-invest. And we want to, in the short term, help people who are going through job transitions because that's super valuable and our community really looks for that. Super ambitious individuals, they just need to get that next step. Long term, it's a community for everyone to get everything. We do meditations, we do technical discussions, community calls. Individuals across the world want to connect, especially if they're feeling isolated or not in a city center. Not everyone lives in New York City like you and we have the privilege to do that. But there's online communities of people who are like-minded, who want to build, connect. And so we use Grupo as a vehicle to connect them. My family also comes from Mexico. And so I think anytime I'm able to connect and globalize opportunities, it's always passion for me. So that combination of things really led to making the decision to create this community and not look back.
That's so awesome. I really feel like it sounds like at least the initial community is a lot of folks in Latin America, which honestly is such a, I think, overlooked market right now
Oh yeah.
in Web3. And I know the last DevCon was in Colombia, which is awesome. That's a good
Yeah.
move forward. But it's like all the projects listening, it's focus it because I think that there's so much there. And like I worked with some incredible
hmm
individuals that are based in like Mexico City as well. And from there, as well
Yeah.
as other parts of Argentina, like Brazil. And
Yeah.
there's so much happening there that I feel like a lot of the folks that are based over here, we don't get a strong sense of unless you're like directly interacting with those communities.
Yeah. A few things they've done well in places like Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia's they've invested in education and engineering, incentivized programs for the last 10 years. And they have colleges that really pump out a lot of engineers, software developers, people with technical skills. And they have a unique playground to test a lot of different products. They don't have a mature tech market like we do in the sense where, we almost have it integrated in our daily life. You Uber from the airport, you order on these 4 different platforms. There's so many different things you can name. A lot of companies down there are still fighting for their space. Yeah, you have the Rappis, you have the Mercado Libres, you have the Brex of the world, but they're still solving local problems. And so right now they're testing in the most available, latest, most interesting technology is Web3. So like they have that combination. Like you have to listen because all the time we're not spending on developing technology like that. They are. People down there are. And that's exciting for me. Places like South America and Africa really are exciting for new emerging technology or new technology actually being tested on a bigger scale.
Yeah, that's so awesome. It was great hearing a little bit more about
Yeah, of
Grupo too. I want to show you guys out some more because
course.
like, I don't know. I think that that's just like a exciting focus and providing some education and that level of connectivity is so key for really any community.
Yeah, thank you. Kelsey, we're a little bit over time. My last question I always like to ask is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have?
Oh, that's so funny. I think in interviews over the years, I asked things similar whenever I chatted with someone about a job in the past. So it is one of my favorites. I think anything that you didn't ask would spark an entire other conversation. I think that there's a lot to get into around diversity inclusion stuff at different in the industry overall and Web3 and how we can actively try to focus on that a little bit more. And we touched on it through, I feel like, the
Yeah.
human level decentralization, but we could get into that maybe another day.
Yeah, yeah. I guess last thing is where can our audience find you? What are you currently excited about? Those 2 things before we wrap up here.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, go to like shardeum.org, has a lot of good stuff. For me personally, LinkedIn, I have avoided Twitter for many, many years, which is wild. I've worked in Web3 for so long, but I'm starting to do a little bit over there.
Begrudgingly.
So that's, yeah, very, very begrudgingly, but I was like, you know what? Let's get some other perspectives out there. So over there, I'm at Hey McGuire. And
Great
then,
name.
yeah, I think the Shardeum, that thank you. That's like my little the ETH address too. But other than that, I think LinkedIn, that I would say that if you actually want a response, LinkedIn is great, because if folks are looking at jobs or want general advice, like I'm happy to talk to you. Just send me a message so I know how you figured out how to reach me and you're not just a random person on LinkedIn. But yeah, definitely shardium.org is great too.
Amazing. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining the show today. It's been a privilege to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for watching the episode. The Grupo Podcast is about technology and working in a remote world. If you like what we're doing, please like, comment, subscribe, and support us interviewing the leaders of today.